Hey guys, welcome to our respective platforms here. My name is Michael Sokol of the channel Beatles Reconstructed. I am joined by an expert panel of Dear Prudence scholars. We have Ray Schillinger of the You Can't Unhear This YouTube channel. Hello, Ray. We also have Obadiah Jones of the incredible podcast Gimme Some Truth. Hello, Obadiah. So today, we may blow some minds. Through the work of Raymond, Obadiah, a little bit by me, we've contacted sources, contacted Beatles experts, and we've gotten a lot of new information and a few breakthroughs about who was playing drums on Dear Prudence. We have new diary entries from Mal Evans, we have new isolations from the sessions that will blow some minds, and perhaps most incredibly, Obadiah has tracked down the Beatles fan, the Apple Scruff, who was outside Trident Studios, taking pictures of the Beatles entering and leaving the sessions, and she sent us more photos. So guys, this is not one you're going to want to miss. To enter the debate, I think the first kind of bedrock question is, was Ringo in town during the Dear Prudence sessions, or was he not in town? And the beginning of the story is when Ringo quit the group. Now, guys, do we have a firm grasp of when Ringo quit the group and why?
Yes, we do. I think, Ray, you found probably the earliest example I've seen of this, of Ringo telling this story to Elliot Mintz in 76, 77, where he quits the band, he goes on holiday to Sardinia, writes Octopus's Garden, comes back, and things are improved, the flowers that we'll get into. But for me, this is kind of where my whole podcast began, because it's discoveries like this that led me to believe that I had enough new information to share that I wanted to start my podcast. I have some specific pieces of evidence that show that Ringo's holiday was in October and not in August. It was actually right at the end of the sessions. And these are things that I just saw through auctions. One benefit of living in London is that I have Sotheby's and Bonhams and other auction houses right here, and I can just go and actually see the physical items. And so in 2019, I went to Sotheby's, and they had Ringo and Maureen Starkey's chauffeur, Alan Herring's collection. And one of the items in there was this postcard that Maureen had written to Alan Herring from Sardinia saying, "It's great." And this is stamped the 19th of October, 1968. Similarly, there was a telegram that Peter Sellers sent 2 days later, 21st of October, that went up for auction, the Liverpool Beatles auction in 2011. And when you start piecing together all these things, suddenly the story that this happened in the middle of the White Album sessions just kind of falls apart, because it clearly didn't. The last piece of evidence, which is in the Beatles Book Monthly, November 1968 issue.
I don't think I've ever seen a physical copy of that, by the way.
They're small. No, they're actually much smaller than you would think. Yeah,
I thought it was like larger. A big magazine. Well, I only see
tiny,
the digital scans. No, that's cool.
One of my COVID lockdown projects was to get a complete set of these. So,
wow, nice.
Yeah, they're super tiny.
Yeah, right here on the last page, there's a little blurb. Beatles news, Ringo and Maureen went to Sardinia, family holiday, 14th of October.
So we do think Ringo actually did quit the Beatles around August 21st or 22nd. And we've gone back and forth on this a little bit. I guess we have two kind of conflicting stories, and we can discuss them now. Barry Miles, in his Many Years From Now biography of Paul, says that on the 22nd, there was this type of argument or discussion about the Back in the USSR drumming. Paul ticked Ringo off over a fluffed tom-tom fill. They had already argued about how the drum part should be played. Ringo was unhappy with the atmosphere in the studio. He did not like Yoko being there, and Paul's criticisms brought the matter to a head. Announcing that he couldn't take it anymore, Ringo quit the group. But now, I think one of us has spoken to Ken Womack this week and has a slightly different vignette to speak about.
Yeah, I did contact Ken about it, and he noted that Ringo actually left because he had been waiting around for the others to show up for a session. I think it was on the 21st. And I think he had been fed up because this had happened again and again, where the others were just kind of neglecting to show up on time, and Ringo just sits around, and that he sort of quit out of protest. Probably a bigger issue, too, with just the general nature of the sessions being kind of disconnected. He didn't feel really as tight in the band, but That's Ken's take on it, that it wasn't actually during the session playing something that set him off, but rather that he was waiting around for the others to show up and then just kind of disappeared.
Now, quick question for you guys. Ringo does have the story he tells all the time, including the anthology, about knocking on everyone's doors and saying, I don't feel like I'm part of the band. And they all say, I thought it was you three.
I'm leaving the group because, I feel like, unloved and out of it, and I'm not playing well, and you three are really close. And he said, I thought it was you three.
Now, do you think this is related to quitting the Beatles here, or is that maybe connected to the October trip?
I felt two things. I felt I wasn't playing great, and the other three were really happy, and I was an outsider.
I think Paul criticizing Ringo's drumming, and that's what caused him to quit. I think the source of that is Barry Miles' biography, because he very specifically says it was a tom-tom fill or something like that that was the reason that he snapped. Where I think Ken Womack is getting that leaving because he was waiting around from is actually a quote from Ron Richards, which was in Mark Lewisohn's recording sessions book. And Ron Richards, who was also around the studios a lot, said that he often saw Ringo kind of waiting around for the others to show up or killing time while they were doing overdubs or something like that. And he was kind of getting fed up with just, not having a lot to do. To me, that the knocking on the doors could be connected to that. There's also another piece of the story, which is that on the 21st of August, George returned from Greece. He had been away just for the weekend to where Paddy was with some friends. He and Mal had gone to Greece and arrived back on the 21st. And the session either started late or ran really late because George was late in arriving. And so that could be connected to Ringo, being annoyed or the others showing up later than he expected them to or something like that.
I don't think I've ever heard from a Beatle the story that, Paul was telling Ringo what to play and Ringo stormed out. Like they have either put the PR version out about feeling disconnected or just haven't mentioned it.
Yeah, Ringo did leave. I can't remember exactly why. I just remember he was suddenly one day, I think, Neil or somebody said, Ringo's gone on holiday.
And he felt insecure, so we had to, and he left. So we had to kind of go and sort of say, no, you're great, man, you're the best.
But I think we can all agree Ringo did indeed quit the Beatles on the 21st or the 22nd and left. Now the debate next is, where did he go?
I actually, when my original episodes came out, I had emailed Mark Lewisohn to invite him to be a guest, and he declined for time restraints at the time, but he replied to say that he'd listened to that first episode about Ringo going to Sardinia and that he agreed with it. And he said, actually, I just had a 1972 interview with Ringo on my desk the other day that isn't published, but he said, I quit, I went and spent a week in my garden, and then I came back.
There was the 1981 quote from the book Shout, Philip Norman, where he says Ringo spent a week at home. So that kind of aligns with that too.
This is kind of not, sort of difficult to parse in evidence, but it's also a really big week for them. And I find it hard to believe he would leave the country for it. They're about to launch Apple, basically, right? Isn't that like the following week? It's kind of a huge moment. So it's just sort of more of a jump in belief here, but it just seems more like Ringo would just chill at home than say, I'm going to leave, be out of the country when we have all these obligations for press and stuff coming up. That, again, it's just my take on it, but I would go with your find, Obadiah, that he's just hanging out at home and taking it easy.
So I think this is where the new evidence starts to kick in. August 27th, the day before the first Dear Prudence session. Obadiah, where is Ringo?
Well, this I first saw this in the A is for Apple series of books, which are just an excellent dump of a bunch of research that Axel Corrent and Ed Dykman did. There's 4 volumes, and I've now since seen the EMI documentation actually for this, but EMI kept note cards for every artist that was under the label, and every session they did was printed on this note card. And so in addition to the actual session documentation for specific sessions, there is a catalog of these note cards with a date and the songs that were worked on. And I've since seen the one for the 27th of August. It's not in my possession, otherwise I would have shared it with you. But it says 27th of August at EMI, George was producing a session for Jackie Lomax for the song You've Got Me Thinking.
You sure don't have a lot, but But you use what you got, and you got nothing.
In the Get Back sessions in January, they actually played this song, a little snippet of it, with Paul singing the lead and doing a kind of a funny Jackie Lomax impression. And Ringo's right there playing the same part. You know, he knows it.
Great transition to some of our new evidence here. We have connected with Ken Womack. Ken Womack is the guardian of the Mal Evans diaries, and we do have new information from Mal's diaries about the 27th.
I think we coincidentally talked to Ken on the same day about this, so kind of funny universal cosmic thing going on. But I emailed Ken, whose book I think I actually have right over here, believe it or not.
Hey.
Who has access to Mal's diaries, which I think, for years have been kind of under lock and key with his family estate, and just recently he's gotten into them and wrote this volume. There's a lot more to come from what I hear. Obviously a trove of information, because Mal recorded virtually everything and every day, or at least details about every day. So I figured, well, let me ask and see if he wrote anything on the days of these sessions for Dear Prudence. And sure enough, Mal did write that on the 27th, he was with Ringo, and that they were, working into the night. So we know they were together on the 27th, at EMI, to be clear. And then we also learn on the 28th that Mal wrote that Mal was bringing equipment from EMI to Trident, which is where the Dear Prudence sessions took place. We know that, carrying the gear over, and that Ringo is there when he gets there, or he's there that evening. It's a little unclear. So we really have some pretty clear written evidence in Mal's diaries that he's with Ringo. Ringo is both at EMI on the 27th and at Trident on the 28th.
And I'll read the quote directly from Ken, and we can cut this if that's something we decide to do, but this is exactly what Ken sent to us. Mal's diary entry has Ringo returning to EMI with George Harrison and Jackie Lomax on the 27th. That's when Mal celebrated his return to the fold with the flowers. That was the big flowers decked in the studio moment.
And I came back and went in the studio, and George had it decked out with flowers. It's just flowers everywhere.
The next day, the 28th, first day of Dear Prudence, there at Trident, Mal and Kevin had to haul all the equipment over to Trident from EMI that afternoon to make the session possible. Ringo was there, and they fated his return. Mal wrote more flowers and fruit.
More flowers.
More flowers.
Just imagine gift baskets of flowers and fruit just like piled up everywhere.
Way too many flowers. So this confirms from Mal Evans that Ringo was at Trident the 28th. First-hand source,
and at EMI
guys.
the night before.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that flower vignette, the story of Ringo's drums being decorated with loads of flowers is such a great story. And, originally in Mark Lewison's recording sessions book, that was put on the 5th of September after the Hey Jude promos were filmed. So that he had him returning way later.
It's also kind of cool just to hear that the story is real in a way. Some of these Beatles stories get repeated so often, they're almost like apocryphal. Like, did that really happen? But there's something about it being in Mal's diary, so specific on those days, that it's like, oh, this is real. They really did that for him. That's really thoughtful. And
it's also very human that they got the dates of it confused too, and condensed the timelines and mixed up vignettes. Yeah, completely human.
It all makes so much more sense now. It's like it's a real story. They just got the date wrong.
Everybody knows Lizzie Bravo, the Brazilian fan who was around, hanging outside EMI all through the Sgt. Pepper sessions, taking amazing photos. I think Cathy Sarver is very similar in that she was, during the White Album sessions in 68 and Abbey Road sessions in 69, she was one of the fans outside. She had a camera. She was taking photos in real time, documenting the time, the date, where it was taken. I knew about her photos. A lot of them have been circulating online, but I found that she was interviewed in a documentary. And in the clip of the documentary, she's holding up her scrapbook of her photo album to this page, these dates.
Wow.
And
got lucky, yeah.
Yeah. And there were photos that I'd never seen before of Ringo, and at the underneath there was, it's kind of hard to see because it was a small photo, but or small frame, but there was a date which I thought was August 29th, 68. And so I managed to get in touch with her, and I asked her, is that correct? I just wanted to confirm that what I thought I saw in the video is actually the truth. And she said, no, actually, it's the 28th. So then the penny dropped for me. I was like, wait a second. That is the Dear Prudence session.
And before I hit the photo, I want to mention the most rewatched element of my video was the single photo I posted of August 30th and Ringo outside, which I will come to in a minute. But for folks who thought that that was not Ringo, or that didn't verify Ringo was at the Trident Studios, at the Dear Prudence sessions, holy moly, guys, look what we got.
There he is.
That is the one and only.
Ringo and Maureen are entering St. Anne's Court, which is this very narrow alleyway in Soho in London's West End. And behind them is a neon sign with a rooster in the middle that says Warner Pathé on it. And that's on Wardour Street. And so, it all just checks out exactly where he was standing, where that photo was taken. So it was on arrival to Trident Studios on the 28th.
And this is a scan directly from Cathy Sarver.
Yeah, we should say that she was very generous to share this, not only this photo, but 7 others. And all she's asked is for a donation to a humane society or an animal charity or something like that just puts some good into the world. We're going to do that personally, but we ask everybody else to contribute if they can. And let's pass on the good juju.
And now she has a part in Beatle history, essentially. She's like,
she always has. But
this. This is like a late stage impact. Incredible, really.
It's like the Abraham Zapruder of the Dear Prudence debate, for sure. If Ringo was at every Dear Prudence session, is Paul playing drums at all on Dear Prudence? Could Ringo be doing the whole thing? That's, I think, the real main question here these photos have introduced is, was Paul ever playing drums on Dear Prudence? Was Ringo there this whole time?
It certainly opens that can of worms, doesn't it? It's, you have to think, who's the best drummer in the room? If Ringo's there, why would he not play?
Where do we think the argument began that Paul was playing drums on Dear Prudence? Where did this start? Do we have any ideas?
It's the official narrative now, isn't it? Which has then been cemented by landmark books like Mark Lewison's recording sessions in 1988.
Yeah, I was trying to find the earliest source claiming Paul played the drums, and it was Mark's book in 1988. And then, I don't know if we can share this publicly, but we have checked with Mark on that. Can we share that? His recent opinion on that?
Yeah, so I spoke with Mark actually pretty recently around their his new documentary film Evolver 62, and I asked one of the questions that came up was about Dear Prudence, and I think he's still a bit, he hasn't quite dug into it as deeply as we have, but he now admits that the story about Ringo being away for 2 weeks and making it impossible to be there, that account is mistaken, and Ringo has been perpetuating the myth for years himself.
Ringo thinks he went away to Sardinia, but he went to Sardinia at the end of the White Album. He only went there once, and it was after the White Album was finished. There's stuff that places him there in October. There's nothing that places...
Right. So I think Mark is aware that the core of this story, which is probably the source of the credit to Paul solely, is in fact not true. Mm-hmm. Which kind of leads us to digging deeper into it, and we're finding other evidence, establishing that. But I think a lot of it, does come from Ringo's recollection originally that he was gone for this whole period, which isn't the case.
So having the basic track done on the 28th, they then began the overdubs. So those included Paul's bass, John's lead vocal, backing vocals, hand claps and tambourine, and they had some visitors.
This is the November Beatles Book Monthly. It is Mal Evans going through track by track the White Album and his personal observations of the sessions. Paul plays piano and flugelhorn. John and I play tambourine. Clapping and chorus singing by all 4 Beatles. I repeat, clapping and chorus singing by all 4 Beatles. Also Paul's cousin John, Apple rocker Jackie Lomax, and yours truly, and that is Mal Evans.
Why would he say that if all 4 were not there? It just seems so specific of a detail. And we know Mal is there. We know he's contributing to the track too. He's around a microphone, so it seems oddly specific.
I love this article in Beatles Book Monthly because this shows why Mal was keeping those notes. He didn't necessarily have a reason to be documenting who was at each session and playing which instrument, but it's because of things like this where he also sometimes got paid to write or have ghost written articles done for 16 magazine and other things like that. But this whole kind of preview of the White Album track by track, talking about the sessions, this is why he was keeping those notes.
If all 4 Beatles were doing backing vocals, we may be able to hear Ringo on that track. And a lot of folks who responded to my video did comment, what about Round, Round, Round? Do you hear Ringo there? I think I hear Ringo there.
Round, 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 round.
So what we've prepared here, there is some new track isolation technology. We have a couple different companies. The best tool I found was able to separate a vocal track 4 ways: soprano, alto, tenor, and bass. So I took just that section of Dear Prudence and did all 4. So what I'll do is hit all 4, and you guys can tell me if and when you hear Ringo. Really not much there to go off of, really.
It's kind of hard to tell. Sounds like Paul to me.
Me too.
Yeah, pretty clear.
Paul McCartney. Right? Sounds pretty close.
That's an easy one.
Round, 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 round.
Who do you guys hear?
We are hearing multiple voices there, but I think the one that you're pointing to is George there.
Yeah, George is the most obvious one. Now, the thing about the technology is there is kind of overlapping vocals. So the tenor isolation might pick up some bass and vice versa. Now, if you guys agree with me, the other voices, one of them at least, kind of sounds like Ringo, doesn't it?
Yeah. I was going to say, if you told me Ringo was in that section, I would believe it.
Let's hit that one
voices,
again.
but...
Yeah, I think that might be worth playing again.
Yeah.
Round, round, round,
Yeah.
round, 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 round.
On that
And
bit.
George.
Round, 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 round.
Back to George. Yeah. Now the bass is where it gets really interesting, guys. Now there's a lot going on here.
Round, 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 round. Round, 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 round.
So I hear John, and we have evidence Jackie Lomax says he did the low harmony. So I think Jackie Lomax, bass, if we trust his recollection, is in there too.
Yeah.
Round.
That's it.
Yeah, I don't know how he did that.
It's like shaking the floor. That's a good one.
So now that we've isolated every possible soprano, alto, tenor, bass element of that part of the song, can we conclusively say we hear Ringo?
I wouldn't
Kind
commit to
of.
it 100%, but it certainly sounds like he's in the mix to me. He's got a very distinct voice, and other examples where there's a group singing on Carry That Weight or Flying, it's pretty easy to pick him out of the chorus there. And similarly, I think you can kind of hear him in the mix here.
What do you think of Paul as a drummer?
He's great, but he only has one sort of set rhythm and one style.
Obadiah found 2 really cool Ringo interviews from the 70s where he's asked what did he play drums on and not play drums on in the Beatles. So without any commentary, I'll just play both back to back.
In one of the albums, Paul did the drumming. Are there any more records that he fit in for you?
No, the only 2 records that I've never played on were Ballad of John and Yoko and USSR. I was away for that.
What do you think of Paul as a drummer?
He's great, but he only has one sort of set rhythm and one style, and he's great on that. But if you try and get him into anything else, he can't make it, but he's good on if you listen to those two tracks, you'll hear that the drumming is the same.
That's pretty amazing, man. That's a pretty amazing clip. Yeah.
And that's less than 18 months after these sessions, so it's pretty fresh.
The date I have here is January 26, 1970, which you put on the clip. Yeah.
The tracks I never played on Love Me Do originally, USSR, which Paul played on, and the Ballads of John and Yoko. They're the three tracks all the other tracks I played on.
So he's very consistent in saying the songs he did not play on, and seemed to have a pretty low ego about it. If he didn't play, he would just say it. He wouldn't cover for it. I think one of the important elements of this whole debate is not just session notes, photographs, but the actual core drumming. The 16th notes on that drumming, we've yet to find a real example of Paul playing 16th notes at that speed on the hi-hat, and I think that's an important thing to mention. We thought we had found one, but it turned out to be a different drummer on a Paul McCartney solo track, but I think that's one of the tells about his limitations, is why we don't see 16th notes, and I've listened to dozens of Paul McCartney drumming performances, so...
Anything I really can't do is shuffles. They're difficult to do. That's just a coordination.
I couldn't do the shuffle like Ringo. You'd be able to do that much better.
If anyone's watching, it can unearth some. Certainly put them in the comments, but I think that's a pretty clear hint of something I never considered till recently, that Ringo is playing the basic track, which to me is completely mind-blowing.
It may just be one of these cases where, because we've heard it's Paul for so long, we're almost forcing ourselves to come up with explanations for it, when Occam's razor would just be like, well, if it's Ringo, all of this makes sense. There is no explanation needed. He's just playing a basic drum track.
He's playing the drums.
So it may be a case of that.
Some people point to the fact that the 16th notes are very straight and not swung, which is more of a Ringo signature.
I think anytime I hit him, it has a vague swing going down.
One of his quirks as a drummer is swing. Almost everything he does is swung. He says this in his master class. You can see it and hear it in all of his fills and a lot of his playing with the Beatles.
Has a bit of that in it when I play.
He could also easily not swing things when it suited the song.
Straight rock and roll, which came after the big bands and Little Richard all playing swing, they sort of straightened everything out to be.
And then if you wanted kind of visual evidence that Ringo doesn't always swing the hi-hat, in the movie Help, they're doing You're Gonna Lose That Girl, and you can see Ringo visibly hitting the hi-hat, not with that little wishy-washy thing he's doing, but straight up and down. If we're doing circumstantial evidence, I think it's pretty clear Ringo could easily do straight hi-hat 16th notes perfectly fine, and we've yet to hear an example of Paul doing it. In my video, I kind of conclude with a smoking gun type of fill. The end of my video is showing that I recreated the part note for note, and you could find fingerprints of other Beatles fills in that part. They were all Ringo fills, but at the very end was a very unique fill. Only Ringo really played. It was left, right, right, left, right, right, left. It's on a couple records. It's on The Word, it's on Dear Prudence. A variation of it is on Drive My Car, Nowhere Man, The Word. But I've never seen video of him doing this, and that would just be an amazing thing to see. But I have a fan who found a jam session Ringo did in the last 5 years, I think, who found him doing this fill. Now, it's not the snare and the floor tom that you see or hear in Dear Prudence. It's the rack tom and the snare, but it's left, right, right, left, right, right, left. So we have video of him doing the fill, not quite the same pieces on the kit, but left, right, right, left, right, right, left. Greg Bissonette has sworn to me Ringo does it all the time. It is a Ringo fill, climaxing the end of Dear Prudence. So day 3, August 30th, the last day of the Dear Prudence session. It's my time to make a correction, guys, and I'm going to eat some crow. Cathy Sarver, who we've mentioned and we've connected with thanks to Obadiah, not only sent new pictures, but sent uncropped versions of pictures that we have seen before, including the one I used in my video. A photograph has surfaced that's apparently August 30th of the Beatles leaving Trident Studios after that last Dear Prudence overdub session. Now, if that's not Ringo behind Yoko, I will eat my nose. Now, to completely embarrass myself, this is a picture of the Beatles entering Trident Studios August 30th. If you look behind Yoko, there is a figure who I believed, and still kind of believe, resembles Ringo Starr. Now, this is the uncropped photo. The photo I had ended before you could see something very special, which is the jacket this person is wearing, and the jacket of the person next to that person. And Obadiah very politely told me exactly who these people are. And they are these folks. Is it Jude Reno is the fan on the left? Do I have that right, Obadiah?
Right. And Helene Weiss is on the right, our right. Paul's left.
On the right, yeah. So this is Paul McCartney in the middle, obviously. This is 1968. On the right is Helene Weiss. On the left, Jude Reno. Clearly, lightly stalking the Beatles. And the picture that I saw that I still laugh at when I see it is this one. That is a Ringo profile on this fan. Ringo's nose, Ringo's hairstyle, Ringo's approximate height. Hanging around with John Lennon. So going back to the original photo, we have the white jacket we saw in the previous picture. We had the green army jacket on Jude. And I think I can conclusively eat my nose and say that is not Ringo in the August 30th photo. I denounce and reject myself. The evidence I found is Neil's wedding. We do have the Beatles monthly book, the tiny one here, which has pictures of Ringo at Neil's wedding, very clear ones. I paid way too much money for it, a second article confirming Ringo's presence at Neil's wedding. This is from Daily Express, August 31st, the next day. So we now have 2 sources verifying Ringo in London. There we go. You have the book too.
Great
and
photos.
there's even photos of him taking photos at the wedding. If you want photographic evidence, there it is.
So we have 2 sources placing Ringo in London at Neil's wedding, and it was only 3 miles away from Trident. And based on the session time, 5 p.m. to 11 p.m., the wedding had to be before that. So we have Ringo at the wedding. He's hanging out with Paul, George Martin, Maureen, and Neil. And then later in the night, Dear Prudence session number 3. Now, I guess, unfortunately, unless you guys have differing thoughts, that's really the only evidence we have that Ringo was also at the August 30th session.
Yeah, I think the thing that is probably what makes this a little bit easier in our case is that the 30th doesn't seem like they did that much according to the documentation. So it's possible Ringo didn't go, and it doesn't really impact the outcome of our conclusion either, I think. If they did the bulk of the drum work 28th, maybe the overdub was on the 29th. It does seem like the 30th was kind of a wrap-up session plus a quick mix. So maybe Ringo just said, hey, I don't need to go, and that doesn't rule out the rest of our case is all I'm saying.
So I think one of the remaining mysteries here is we don't really know when this drum overdub was recorded. And I think there is a reason why, and it's a lack of documentation at Trident Studios. Does anyone have more background about why that was?
EMI is actually kind of unique in how much documentation there is. Trident Studios had only been open since March 1968. To compete with the big studios like EMI and Decca, the best way to do that was to get the most modern technology. And so they were one of the first studios to have 8-track recording facilities where EMI was still recording on 4-track. Anyway, to circle back to the documentation, they were an independent studio, not a lot of staff, and basically, as far as I know, the only documentation that exists from Trident are the tape boxes, which do have information about what was on each channel. But we've never seen the tape box of Dear Prudence. It's never been shared. The one for Hey Jude, which was the only other track they ever recorded at Trident up to this point, is in the deluxe booklet. And so we can see exactly, all 8 tracks, what was on each track. I can only assume that exists for Dear Prudence.
Yeah. So we don't quite know when the overdub was recorded. Till the tape box comes out, we may never know.
kind of no idea. Yeah.
And that wouldn't necessarily tell you the date that things were done either. You know, it would probably have the date of the first session, but then it would just have a list of tracks and what was on each track.
It might be helpful, I think, for people watching, like maybe they haven't watched all the other videos yet, but like just to establish why this track is a bit special too, as far as how they recorded it. I mean, they're at Trident, we know that. They're using 8-track tape, which for them at this point was kind of new and fresh. So they had a lot of, opportunities to add extra instruments, overdub things. And also for some reason, there are no outtakes to this, as far as I know. Like every account I've read is that there was basically one finished track that they just kept going back and fixing and adding more onto and whatever. So unlike a lot of the other songs, we don't have anything else to work with. Like there's no chatter before it. There's no what we have is all. So it's a bit of a peculiar case because even though there are overdubbed drums, we don't have the earlier versions. There may have been other stuff even done before this, right? So it's a particularly tricky one. It's all I'm pointing out for people to understand. It's not the usual Beatles fare.
On my video, a lot of the initial comments supporting Paul said, listen to some of these songs and tell me they don't sound like Dear Prudence. And the examples were My Dark Hour, Mama Miss America, and I'm going to mispronounce this, Crean Acori.
Crean Acori.
I've been thinking about this, and the first thought I had was, all these are on McCartney 1, or at least a lot of them are on McCartney 1. And Paul is using Ringo's kit.
Law number 5 is next. This is Ringo Starr's first Ludwig drum kit, and it is the drum kit acquired by Ringo Starr in April of 1963 and used by him extensively as his sole drum kit from the 12th of May 1963 to the 4th of February 1964. It was additionally used by Paul McCartney to record his first solo album, McCartney, in 1970.
I think that's an important factor. The drum kit Paul is using, it's an Oyster Black Pearl kit, a 1963 downbeat kit. It's a Ludwig snare. If folks are saying, well, the snare sounds just like Dear Prudence, well, it's because it's Ringo's kit. So what I've done is isolated the drums on all 3 of those tracks and only pulled out the most impressive fills to me. Now, I thought that was impressive because he's alternating between the rack tom and the snare pretty quickly, and I'll play that slowed down. So what stood out to me is that he's alternating between the rack tom and the snare, not the floor tom and the snare. So we can kind of do this, but it doesn't show to me he can alternate between all of the drums on his kit, between both toms and the snare. Now, one important element here, which I haven't mentioned, is there are 2 drum performances on this song. He's playing 2 different drum performances, one on each channel. So I thought this was, oh wow, he's really kind of alternating quickly between the snare and the tom. It's because the tom is from the other track. That's why.
Isn't most of the song just sort of solo drum work, like explorations? He's not playing along to a band. He's not trying to follow some rhythm. He's just sort of jamming on his own. So it seems like that would be
This is Paul's impression of tribal drumming, basically.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
The track is inspired by a South American Native American tribe called the Crean Acori, so that's exactly what he's trying to do here.
Mama Miss America is a bit easier. I had just one fill, and he plays it twice. So he does alternate there between the rack tom and the snare, which is Ringo-esque. Do-da-da-da-dun-dun. Now the caveat is there's no floor tom. It's just the rack tom and the snare. So Paul could alternate if the drum's in front of him. The most impressive Paul fill I heard was on My Dark Hour, and this actually brought my opinion up pretty high. So what he's doing is floor tom, rack tom, alternating. And it impressed me because it's one of the fills Ringo plays on Rain. And at that point I was like, Paul's a better drummer than I thought. It was the first time I heard him play an actual difficult Ringo fill.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, like we're not trying to knock Paul either. I think it's just, to be clear, like, I think there's a lot of people in the comments who sort of take this as a slight against Paul, who's
not at all.
Obviously incredibly talented as multi-instrumentalist. Like, no knock on him at all, but there's a line where it just seems like, well, if Ringo was there, There's a very, very high likelihood that the complexity can be attributed to him rather than a slight on Paul. Just to put that out there to anyone who's about to post about how much we hate Paul or something.
Paul is my favorite Beatle and has been for a while.
So I'll end with the words of one of our greatest poets, Sir Paul McCartney.
The way I tried to explain it on Give Me Some Truth is like, Shohei Ohtani couldn't swim at the Olympics. Like, he's the best baseball player who's ever lived. He's a 5-tool player. Every athlete has a limitation. It doesn't make them a poor athlete. Like, Paul was an incredible pianist, guitar player, bass player, songwriter, performer. That doesn't mean he's a great drummer. That doesn't translate. The fact that he's a really good drummer shows what a great musician he is. But to say that there's things that Ringo could do that Paul could not is no strike against Paul's musicianship, his talent, or our love for him. But it's a fact, and it's important to acknowledge with debates about who's playing what on what song. Paul, don't burn my house down, please. I love you. My final question for you guys is, for those who are still on the fence, what could possibly end it for them?
It's tough to say.
Yeah,
I think even if Ringo says it, it's not a reliable enough source for some people, or if Paul says it, it's so far removed at this point. And maybe just on a more sort of broad topic, like I think the world we live in now, the whole notion of truth has kind of shifted to where I think people are much more comfortable with their own narrative than they are with reality, which is sad to say. So you could present every piece of evidence ever and someone still might not accept it. They'll say, oh, AI came up with that or something. Like, I think we're just in a different era now for what is truth, but that's a whole other discussion for another day. But as far as the context of this, I think I would be curious if somebody showed this to Ringo at some point and showed him the photo of him there and played the snippet. Could he just be definitively confirming it? That would be, for me, that would be such an interesting moment. But what else do you guys have in mind?
I think I'm a bit more optimistic than you, because I think if it were presented funnily to Paul, if the part of my video recreating the fills was presented to Paul and someone just said, is there any point in your life you could do that? I think his answer would be no. And I think that would definitively solve it. I think even more so. I think if Ringo saw it and said, those are my fills, that's also getting really close to case completely closed, lock him in jail, throw the key away. But if Paul said also, I cannot do that, that's it. The debate is over. So if any of you guys interview Paul or Ringo at any point, play them that part, because I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility to completely end this, even for the diehards who don't believe all the evidence presented so far.
I just wanted to say that Ray is really the OG in this whole thing, because his video came out first and was a useful resource for when I was making my episodes. So thank you, Ray.
I never guessed it would have spawned so many other interesting follow-up dimensions. And funny story too, when I was randomly listening to your podcast, Obadiah, I found it, somebody on Reddit had mentioned it or something like that. And I was listening to the very first or second episode, whichever one this was. And it was like, oh, it's about Dear Prudence. This is going to be so interesting. And then you mentioned, well, I watched this video. You can't hear this about it. And I was like blown away. I was like, oh my gosh, it's led to so much else. And I found the depth of analysis you put into that episode is astounding. And finding the photos, incredible. So I hope this sort of stuff, the whole purpose of even my work is just inspiring a further conversation about it. I don't have the definitive answers either. I don't think any of us really do. Right.
Well, this is what I love about history, and Beatles history specifically is, obviously my passion, but a new piece of evidence comes along and it just rewrites everything. And that's what, history is a malleable thing. It's a growing thing. It has to change with new evidence.